Hi there, you're watching Time Warner Cable's Local Edition. This is the Sacramento Report. I'm Jaime Garza, and I'm joined today by Senator Bob Huff. Good to have you, Senator.
Good to be here again, Jaime.
There was a lot of cheering when we got a budget passed on time this year, but the cheers quickly have dwindled away because once we start picking away at the budget that was passed, there is some question as to what really is in this. And again, there are a lot of projections in this budget that may not come to fruition, and a lot of agencies, a lot of school districts have counted on those numbers and what's happening to them in the future. Right. Fill us in on what the trigger cuts are in there and how that all works.
Let's back up to the first part. You know, this is the first budget we've had on majority vote. That was Prop 25 last year. And so the budget didn't have as much scrutiny as it normally does. And so it really was a Democrat budget. And you'll remember the governor vetoed the first version. And so they cobbled together some stuff and some other assumptions. Then we end up with the one we're now, peeling the layers back and finding out what's actually in there. There was about $10 billion of risky assumptions. Some of those things like the redevelopment agencies, $1.7 billion. So there's a lawsuit there. Supreme Court's weighed in, stayed the collection of that to figure out what they're going to do there. There was another couple billion that have to do with Medicare and whether the federal government will allow us to do what we did. There was some other stuff related to Prop 98 because there was borrowing some sales tax money and rerouting at the local government for that realignment. And then they promised that the unions that, well, we'll do a tax down the road and then we'll give you from there. Well, there's questions about whether that's a legal maneuver. So when you start adding up all that plus a little phantom $4 billion they magically plugged in at the tail end to bridge the gap, it's about $10 billion in risky assumptions. So that sets us up for the fall when the so-called trigger cuts are supposed to come into play. We don't believe they're actually going to pull the trigger. If they wanted to do that, they would have done it already.
Mm-hmm. If it was my budget, my home budget, I couldn't make assumptions. I would have to budget my money with what I do have, and if I get extra down the road, that's gravy to use in other areas. Why not do it that way?
Well, the state just doesn't have that same mantra. Local government actually, many of them do well the same way that you do at home. They make aggressive assumptions on expenses, but conservative on revenues. The end of the year, they have extra and they bank it. That's what we did in Diamond Bar where I was on the city council. The state does just the opposite. They make, rosy assumption on revenues, and then later on they go back and try to find some funds they can raid. So even when you look at the controller's numbers, we're $540 million in less revenues already, and we just started this fiscal year.
There's been a lot of talk to say, you know what, why don't we focus one full year on the budget? And that should be the job of lawmakers in Sacramento. That way you can peel away the layers, you can sit down and focus completely on the budget without any sidetracks. Do you support something like that? So
Absolutely.
Maybe we don't find this out later?
Yeah, I think Senator Weiland had a bill like that. It'd be a 2-year cycle, and 1 year you're working on the fiscal stuff, the next year you're working on the policy. I think there's a lot of merit to that, because the problem is in the good years, everybody gets a budget quickly, but they really don't give it the scrutiny that they should. So even in the good years, you ought to have a protracted, how can we do this better? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we getting there? Can we do it better? Set up some goals, objectives, and run it through a little bit more rigor. I think would get a much better product that way.
This is not a personal jab at you, but as a whole for lawmakers, we know that the consensus is the public in California have a distrust for lawmakers right now. They don't feel like their best interest is being taken to heart, and it's really politics. Yeah. What do you tell your constituents who feel like that?
Well, my constituents obviously like me because they keep re-electing me, and that's a good thing. I appreciate that. But we look at the whole and you just see what looks like dysfunction. You got all the people representing different parts of the state, and frankly, that's what the political process is. So it shouldn't be disliked because we're actually debating issues. I think that's what the whole form of bringing you together is. The problem is we don't always get to the outcome where we need to go because term limits, a lot of different things, name it. But it's a challenge.
Senator Bob Huff, continue that challenge. And thank you at home for watching Time Warner Cable's Local Edition.